Hello and welcome to this edition of Trojan Talk. I'm Paige Ray. Joining us today, a familiar voice, maybe not a face, but a familiar voice. This is Operations Manager, host, producer of Troy University Public Radio, Kyle Gassiott. Kyle, thanks for being here.
Hey Paige, thanks for having me.
Of course. Now, I would like to point out a familiar voice because anybody who hangs around at Troy, listens to Troy broadcasts, they know your voice. So tell us what you do.
Sure. Well, it's a little bit of everything. Sometimes I say chief cook and bottle washer, but also I am the operations manager for the station. So that means that I'm over news, I'm over the on-air sound, I'm over programming, fundraising, podcasting, and I helped found our student intern program, so I'm a little over that too. So a lot of things.
Now, the reason we have you here is because you played a part in the recent Selma tornado outbreak that we saw, and we know that you have a firsthand account of what happened. You were helping report and get information out to the public. So can you kind of give us a day in your life of that situation?
Sure. Well, as you said, a lot of people who listen to Troy Public Radio may know that we file frequently for NPR, somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 6 features a year, and then longer form stories, and then we do a lot of the short newscast stories too. So we're always looking for stories that might not only just appeal to our local listeners, but also to our national listeners as well, and tell our story larger. So I was watching the weather as everybody else was that day, and I happened to be in Montgomery because we do have a studio up there as well. So I split my time between Montgomery and Troy, and I was watching the news, watching the weather, and I, along with everyone else, saw what a large, massive storm that was headed for Selma. And then when I learned that it had moved on and it was safe to go, I just got in the car and called down here and said, I'm headed to Selma, and I called my editor NPR and said, I'm headed there too. And it was interesting. It was, once I got to Selma, there was a lot of traffic. You could tell that there was just a lot of concentrated effort to get into the city to see what had happened. I was able to get off and pull off and interview the principal of the Edgewood Elementary School, because I knew so many people had been worried about their children. Originally, the reports had said that the tornado was headed for Selma High School, and luckily it didn't, West End High School, but luckily it didn't end up hitting there. But at Edgewood Elementary, the principal said that there were a lot of parents who had come to pick their children up before the storm hit. And the rule and the regulation in the Selma school system is that you can't take a child whenever there's a tornado warning. So they were able to shelter those families in the school with them. But after that, Paige, it was trying to get downtown. And you could tell that not only were city officials directing traffic that day, and of course the local police officers, but also civilians had jumped out to really try to control and handle things. And they had to cut power lines so we could get by, sweep away debris. I covered Selma for a number of years. I've been here for 10 years and been to Selma off and on to report stories, and I'd never seen it like that. Really? It was just devastated. And I was finally able to get downtown and then immediately connect with my editor and went on to All Things Considered Live that afternoon to report from there.
Wow. Now, you know, part of your job and your duties, you teach. You teach journalists getting ready to go into that field. How does experiences like the one you had in Selma help you to inform and really teach people how to do the same thing?
I'm so glad you asked, because that's something that is really always on my mind. Mainly because somebody did that for me when I was going through journalism school. And I always feel like it's so important to try to include students in everything that we do in terms of our news reporting and broadcast, because you never know what little bit that you let somebody do can change their life or open their world as a journalist. But yes, whenever I'm doing something like that, I'm oftentimes keeping track. If I don't have a student with me, I'm keeping track of what I'm doing. So when I can come back, I can say, okay, now when I went into that situation, I obviously didn't have a lot of time to sit down and write out a whole story or interview that I'm going to do live. I had to sort of keep track of what I was seeing and make notes in my mind. So when I got on the phone with my editor, she and I could put it into a script. You know, when you go live on the air like that, you typically don't wing it. Sometimes you do, but a lot of times these things are actually scripted out to a certain degree. You have an outline. So I told one of our students, I said, it's really important to just be eyes and ears on the ground, because you never know what little bit of detail you're going to provide that's really going to help somebody understand the story, and especially if it's just your words.
Mm-hmm. Now let me ask you this. A lot of our students, thankfully, cover university-related events. They're going to get their feet wet, and it's not necessarily always hard news. They're not always talking to people in a crisis or people who have just experienced trauma. What's your advice when you're in a situation like that and you're reporting what you're seeing and you're talking to people whose maybe home just got destroyed?
That is a really good question too. In fact, something I just was talking about with my students in my journalism classes this morning. You really have to be, number one, I think, that voice of just human compassion. I mean, as journalists, we're not robots. We're not just out there recording and turning around. We are people that are on the scene, and that's important. Our eyes and our ears, and I think our hearts are important to be there and engaged as well. So I think you first have to be there and just be sympathetic and say, I'm so sorry that this happened to you.
We just appreciate everything that you've done, and we appreciate you educating future journalists to be able to do the same thing with compassion and with emotion in it. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Paige. I'm very happy to do it. And I will put in a plug for our weekly show, The Talk of Troy, which is the official podcast of the university. It is produced by students, and it's a great listen every week. It really brings you the sights and the sounds of Troy University. It really brings you the voices and sounds of Troy University and really brings you here. And we use that as a tool to train our students as well. So I put in a plug for that too.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Kyle. We appreciate you being here. And thank you for joining us on this edition of Trojan Talk.